Fortress of No Return, The Shadow of Colditz, 1939 to 1940. In the fading autumn light of November 1939, German soldiers filed up the lanes of Saxony to a brooding medieval castle mounted above the Mulde River. Its gray stone, looming turrets, and iron-studded gates, once host to kings and mad princes, stood ready for a new fate. After Poland's collapse, the Wehrmacht governors, rattled by officers escaping from lesser German camps, chose Colditz to serve as their escape-proof fortress. Oflag IV-C's so-called invincibility drew its first chain-rattling inmates just before Christmas, 1939. French, Polish, and Dutch officers, all branded as repeat escapers, arrived in huddled lorry loads. By late 1940, the war's tempo quickened. After Dunkirk's collapse, Britain's finest joined their continental peers behind the castle's ancient walls. Scions of noble houses, rugby stars, chess champions, architects, and engineers, each one skilled in the clandestine arts, sized up the imposing structure, plotting not just escape but battle of wits against their jailers. Subscribe so you won't miss new stories, and feel free to ask questions in the comments. Your interest inspires us to discover new topics. The mood inside could teeter from black despair to manic mischief. The commandant, Oberst Schmidt, stalked the halls in gleaming jackboots, flanked by alert Feldwebels. Yet his charges countered with sly sabotage and hidden wireless sets. At recreation hours, forbidden eyes measured courtyard stones, counting every yard from barred windows to the patrolled perimeter. At night, longing stoked imaginations. Would any scheme ever lead out, past walls 11 meters thick, past razored wire and alert sentries? But if the guards thought Colditz unassailable, they underestimated the prisoner's genius. In the ancient cellars, beneath the echo of boots, a dozen officers gathered. They whispered in coded French, English, and Polish, and began the first of what would become a legendary campaign. The tunnels, disguises, forgeries, and flying machines that would make Colditz infamous had begun. The first forays, schemes, spies, and the French tunnel, winter 1940, spring 1941. The first major bid for liberty brewed beneath Colditz during the harsh winter of 1940. In a dank, forgotten cellar, a band of French officers, led by Pierre Maurice Lebrun, picked at the mortar with improvised tools. Under the cover of nightly roll calls and strict rationing, they had shovels fashioned from bed slats and kitchen scraps, and plugged the interminable dust up their sleeves. Above, the prisoners played games, staged elaborate distraction dramas, and sat for inspection in stifling dormitories. Every move was measured. One missed roll call or misplaced sock could bring weeks in solitary. But beneath the stone, the real drama churned in darkness. Lanterns fashioned from tin cans flickered, and the tumblers counted paces by heart. On the night of January 29, 1941, the tunnel broke through, almost. The French, feverish and trembling, gazed through crack in the surface, nearly outside the wire, but short of the forest. Their disappointment was not despair. A future attempt might break through. Colditz, though, was waking up. The guards discovered damp dust, tracked boot prints, and increased sentries. Retaliations grew harsh. Anyone caught faced icy solitary cells, starvation rations, and interrogations. But ingenuity thrived under pressure. British officers soon launched their own attempts. German uniforms tailored from Red Cross blankets, forged passes stamped in wax from stew bones, and elaborate fake mustaches grew in secret. Air Commodore Douglas Bader, his artificial legs clanking, hobbled the corridors and offered diversionary antics while fellow airmen slipped away at night with forged documents. Each failure bred more refinement and more stories for Allied propaganda, which, by spring 1941, sought to elevate Colditz's escapades as beacons of hope. Harry Neve, British mastermind and the first successful escape, August 1941. Summer 1941 blistered Colditz's stone ramparts, and with it came the camp's most famous breakthrough. Among the British, Lieutenant Harry Neve, a bespectacled, disarmingly gentle intelligence officer, stood out for his brilliance and icy focus. Sentenced to Colditz after a failed escape from Stalag XXA, where he had worn pieces of a Polish uniform, Neve reckoned Colditz's security as mere blind faith in old stone. Neve teamed up with Dutch officer Tony Ludian for what became Operation Uspala, a plan as daring in conception as in execution. For months, the duo gathered intelligence, studying guard shifts and the rhythms of German patrols. They procured fake German uniforms, sewn from blankets and dyed with boot polish, and an array of counterfeit documents. On August 5, 1941, the plan went into motion. Neve and Ludian, disguised as German corporals, strolled past sentries, saluting smartly in the dusk. Hidden by heavy rain and sharp wits, they reached the outer wall. A diverted searchlight beam, thanks to a last-moment ploy by British inmates, let them vanish into the night. For 4 terror-soaked days, the escapees dodged patrols and checkpoints, hiding in haylofts and barns. They spoke only in guttural whispers, hiding their accents, groping along rain-lashed roads towards Switzerland. On August 9th, hearts racing, Neve and Ludian crossed the Swiss border and entered British legend. Their tale electrified London, with Neve's success splashed in headlines from the Times to BBC broadcasts. German morale plummeted, a fortress meant for hopelessness had become a symbol of Allied defiance. Colditz would never be the same. Escalation and Innovation, Peter Allen's Bold Disguise and the Ghosts in the Attic, late 1941, spring 1942. German fury over Neve's escape erupted in new restrictions. Inspection hours doubled, solitary confinement cells overflowed. Yet Colditz's population grew ever more diverse, its experiments ever more thrilling. New arrivals included resourceful Poles, veterans of Warsaw's doomed resistance, and Dutch Royal Marines, bringing their own escape lore. One British officer, Peter Allen, became legend for his near-fatal impersonation of a German soldier. In October 1941, Allen and Australian Michael Sinclair crafted near-perfect Feldwebel uniforms, meticulous down to the blackened boots and paper cigarettes. During a rainstorm, they joined a real work detail marching out of the castle's east gate. Passing 6 checkpoints, they almost reached freedom until a suspicious underofficer questioned Sinclair in rapid-fire German. The ruse failed, and the pair landed in solitary. But in the shadows, Allied morale soared. Every unsuccessful attempt provided blueprints for future breaks. Meanwhile, the attic of the chapel became the headquarters for ghost operations. Hidden behind false walls, entire teams worked on decoys, including dummies that replaced prisoners during roll call, one made from a stuffed uniform, boots, and a melon for a head. Allied ingenuity turned the Commandant's own roster system into chaos. At times, Germans believed the count was right, only to discover hours later that a missing man was made of straw. Each small triumph chipped at the invincible reputation of Colditz, and kept the dream alive that for every failed escape, a new plan would germinate in its place. Tunneling fever, the French Lorraine escape in the Tower Tunnel, 1939 to 1942. If disguises and dummies were Colditz's daily bread, tunneling was its secret feast. French ingenuity reignited in late 1941, fresh from failed attempts. Captain Pierre Maurice Lebrun and his compatriots began what would be dubbed the Lorraine Tunnel. Maps smuggled in Red Cross parcels guided their excavation beneath the castle chapel, with bedsheets as rope, tin spoons as shovels, and butter lamps burning in the dust. Digging, begun in early winter, lasted through early 1942, and morale in the French quarters soared with hope. Each bucket of earth was stashed in attic crawlspaces or mixed into garden beds disguised as vegetable plots. Night after night, tunnelers pressed onward, sweat and dirt matting their hair, passing their freedom quest down the line. At last, on March 11, 1942, the Lorraine team broke surface, under the wrong patch of grass, within sight of a German sentry. Quick-thinking officers scrambled, but the plot collapsed. 3 were recaptured within hours. Yet, the network, undeterred, began a second tunnel, the Tower Tunnel. This time, they engineered an air pipe of rolled tin cans, and created a pulley system to ferry the elderly or wounded. By spring, rumors of Colditz's mole army spread through Germany's security forces, setting off frantic new countermeasures. With every failed tunnel and every foiled disguise, Colditz prisoners grew bolder. Outside, the war's violence raged. Inside these medieval walls, a silent battle of minds built inexorably toward Colditz's next, and boldest, escapes. The Polish Plot, a symphony of sabotage and secrets, spring, summer 1942. As spring blossomed outside the castle's grim embattlements, the Polish officers of Colditz Oflag IV-C drew upon bitter lessons from Nazi occupation back home. Many had fought in the early weeks of 1939 and had already risked their lives resisting in Warsaw. Now, inside Colditz, they wielded cunning honed by years eluding the Gestapo. Major Joseph Ziadek and Lieutenant Kazimierz Jaskolski, both legendary among prisoners for their technical prowess and resilience, formed a secret Polish section. Their specialist skills were applied in ingenious sabotage, rewiring radios for coded transmissions, designing hidden compartments in ordinary furniture, and teaching fellow officers lockpicking and silent movement, the kind that had saved their lives in Warsaw's burning alleyways. The Poles became key suppliers in the camp's escape armory, developing chemical concoctions to dissolve bars, often diluted by limited resources, but nonetheless useful in slow, persistent acts of sabotage. But their true masterpiece unfolded in June 1942, masked by a fake illness outbreak. Polish prisoners simulated a typhoid scare, causing German guards to relax perimeter tracking, fearing infection. Under cover of medical chaos, the Poles staged a coordinated diversion. One team drew a patrol's attention to the infirmary, while another, dressed as orderlies, dragged two patients, French and Dutch officers, on stretchers, bundled under blankets with forged papers. They nearly reached the main gate before a sharp-eyed Feldwebel spotted an out-of-place boot peeking from beneath a sheet, ending the ruse but earning lasting respect among Oflag IV-C's escaped fellowship. Through these months, the camaraderie among nationalities intensified. Despite language barriers and old rivalries, Colditz prisoners learned that only united planning yielded any chance against the castle's grim reputation. The British Spirit, Pat Reed and the Clock Tower escape, August-September 1942. In the chill haze of late August 1942, Colditz's British officers readied one of their most audacious attempts yet, a plot that would etch Captain Pat Reed, a former engineer, and his team into Allied legend. Reed, a tall, quick-thinking Irishman, had survived 2 failed escape attempts already. In his engineer's mind, each setback offered new blueprints for the next offensive. For months, Reed's escape committee had mapped every inch of the elaborate clock tower above the main courtyard. From inside the castle, access was limited and always guarded. Nevertheless, the team learned the changing schedules of maintenance staff, noting which guards grew bored during night shifts. Borrowing keys from covert sources and duplicating them with boot polish and wax, Reed and fellows created a meticulous plan. On the night of September 14, 1942, while the camp's focus lay on a staged argument near the kitchens, designed to distract, Reed, Australian Dick Howe, and Dutchman Henri Shrapnel slipped into the clock tower through a hidden access door. The climb was perilous, each step echoing along medieval stone, exposed to any passing sentry's lantern. Once inside, they evaded detection by adjusting the tower's clock to delay scheduled patrols, a small but essential detail. The final descent required rappelling from the tower frost-covered ledge, a 30-foot drop to the outer courtyard. Improvised ropes of bed sheets, reinforced with hidden wires, sent the trio into the shadowy night. Within hours, they had crossed the German border and reached Switzerland, breathless but victorious. The escape, and especially Reed's later best-selling memoir, became a blueprint for the British attitude of never defeated, and sparked new vigor in the camp's escape engine. The French parole, using honor and deceit to slip away, autumn 1942, winter 1943. Among the ranks of Colditz's prisoners, French officers preserved an old military tradition, parole agreements, contracts of temporary release based on an officer's word of honor not to escape. The Germans sometimes released French officers on health grounds, trusting they would not attempt flight. But in autumn 1942, a team led by Commandant Pierre Maurice Lebrun reimagined this tradition as a weapon of deception. Lebrun, charismatic and resourceful, feigned severe gastrointestinal illness. The Germans, wary and overwhelmed, agreed to a limited parole to a nearby hospital under guard. What they did not expect was a complex web of forgeries and swapped identities. On October 26, Lebrun's escort, ostensibly two elderly, sickly French captains, were, in truth, British and Polish officers, their faces bandaged and posture limp to mimic illness. In the chaos of a hospital transfer, the disguised patients slipped out a service entrance and merged into the crowds of Leipzig, heading south by bicycle. By risking Germans' trust in centuries-old military codes, Lebrun's team demonstrated that every convention, honor, tradition, rank, could become a chess piece in the larger game. Though the escape ended with recapture in Baden near the Swiss frontier, the psychological message was clear. Colditz's men would leverage every facet of wartime life, from technology to ancient honor, in their pursuit of liberty. Michael Sinclair, The Red Fox and the Ultimate Disguise, Spring-Autumn 1943. Somewhere between genius and audacity dwelled Red Fox, the British legend Michael Sinclair. Sinclair, possessed of nimble hands and boundless bravado, became notorious among both prisoners and Germans for his role in the camp's greatest impersonation scheme, masquerading as the German Kommandant himself. The plan unfolded in mid-1943, after weeks of observation. Sinclair, with angular face and piercing eyes, trained for the part, walking the castle corridors with military precision, learning the Commandant's gestures and quirks, and practicing guttural German under the tutelage of Dutch linguists. The tailoring crew, meanwhile, recreated the Commandant's ceremonial uniform with needlepoint accuracy, down to waxed boots and a hand-carved Luger pistol. On September 4, 1943, the escape commenced. Sinclair, dressed in full regalia, strode through the castle corridors, greeted by nods of respect from German guards. In tow, two British officers dressed as orderlies carried official-looking papers and medical bags. Their ruse required splitting the attention of sentries with a staged accident in the kitchens, a technique well honed by previous escapees. Sinclair and his team almost bluffed their way to the outer gate before a skeptical sergeant, noting the Commandant never tours at this hour, demanded identification. In the chaos that followed, Sinclair was shot and wounded but survived, his daring earning both praise and infamy. The Red Fox's legend spread, a testament that Colditz's captives would dare anything, even to wear the enemy's face. Underground Network, Red Cross Parcels and the Secret Radio, Winter 1943, Spring 1944. The rhythm of escape attempts at Colditz grew ever more complex, as prisoners wielded new technologies and external contacts. The key to this network was the Red Cross Parcel, a lifeline offering food, medicine, books, and, if cleverly altered, escape supplies. British engineer Dick Howe and Dutch wireless expert Johannes de Leede masterminded the construction of an illegal radio transmitter from scavenged parcel contents. By December 1943, behind a false wall in the British quarters, they relayed coded messages to Allied intelligence in Switzerland and London. Packages of real German currency, civilian clothes, medicines, and maps began arriving under Red Cross cover, labeled as medical texts or dental instruments. This clandestine radio became the command center for wider escape operations. Using intercepted broadcasts, prisoners learned of troop movements, major battles, and the shifting tides of war, news which influenced escape route decisions and timing. Security teams across the camp coordinated, learning to synchronize distraction maneuvers and replace personnel on critical shifts. The radio's eventual discovery in April 1944 led to mass punishment, weeks of darkness, and bread rations. Yet the spirit of defiance remained unbroken, and Colditz's men grew ever more adept in the double game of deception and ingenuity. International alliances, the United Escape Committee, Spring-Summer 1944. By the spring of 1944, Colditz had evolved beyond a mere collection of nationalities. It became a crucible of international collaboration. The frequency and complexity of escape attempts had convinced the British, French, Dutch, Polish, and now American officers that only unified planning could outwit ever-watchful German guards. It was in April 1944 that Major Ronald Littledale, a British veteran of successful breakout attempts, and Lieutenant Commander Francis Steinmetz of the Dutch Royal Navy assembled the United Escape Committee. The organization shifted from individual, nationality-based plots to bold multinational ventures, where every skill found a place. French forgers worked with Polish tunnelers. British radio experts synced with Dutch engineers, American bartering specialists, new to the camp after their capture from D-Day operations, sourced German tools from bribed guards. The committee used intelligence relayed from the secret radio, still operational in various forms despite frequent German searches, combined with aerial photographs and tactical news smuggled in through Red Cross parcels. They developed rotation schedules so escapes would keep German attention stretched thin across the sprawling, multi-winged compound. While one nationality staged a diversion, another would move into position for a real attempt. The practical results? The committee engineered mass dress rehearsals for disguise and movement. Frenchman Jean-Jacques Morel, expert in accent mimicry, twice impersonated German kitchen staff. Meanwhile, Americans introduced quick-change techniques using layers of civilian clothing under uniforms. Rumor spread through the ranks that Colditz prisoners were becoming ghosts, masters of slipping from place to place under the very noses of their captors. Although many attempts still ended in recapture or solitary punishment, the committee's efforts forged an unbreakable esprit de corps, a prelude to coordinated escape attempts on a scale never before seen in POW history. The American Wave, Escape Fever and Cultural Collision, Summer-Autumn 1944. In June 1944, following the Normandy landings, Colditz received a vibrant influx of American officers and aviators swept up in Europe's ferocious fighting. Suddenly, the old stone halls echoed with new voices, slang, and improvisational spirit. The Americans, fresh from infiltration and sabotage schools, brought radical new methods, and a touch of breezy innovation, to the entrenched traditions of European escape artistry. Led by Lieutenant John Dodge and the ebullient aviator George W. Tex Brodeur, the Americans accelerated existing escape plans, running clandestine workshops on crafting lockpicks, improvising explosives, and forging ration cards. They integrated seamlessly with the United Escape Committee, serving as quartermasters, trading cigarettes, coffee, and even cans of Spam with the guards for information and black market tools. But American cultural audacity sometimes clashed with the camp's meticulous British and French methods. The Americans preferred high-risk run and gun tactics. In August 1944, two GIs in Red Cross delivery uniforms attempted to walk straight out the castle's main gate during a night shift change. The bold gambit failed, leading to tighter security and the transfer of several guards. Yet each failed attempt sharpened tactics and fortified camaraderie. While raising hope, the war seemed finally to be swinging in the Allies' favor. Inside Colditz's storied walls, officers developed secret code signals, tapping Morse on pipes, marking books with invisible ink, or subtly rearranging chessboards, ensuring that every nationality played a crucial role in upcoming escapes. With the Americans' arrival, Colditz's escape culture fused brash creativity with steely tradition, setting the stage for its most legendary project. The Colditz glider, conceiving the impossible, October-November 1944. If earlier escape attempts seemed epic, autumn 1944 brought a plan bordering on myth, an aircraft constructed in secret, meant to soar prisoners out over the castle's rugged ramparts. The Colditz Cock, a two-man glider envisioned by British Flight Lieutenant Bill Goldfinch and engineer Jack Best, rose from desperate hope and astonishing ingenuity. The concept had been seeded months earlier, following news of Allied advances and the growing possibility that retreating German guards might abandon their posts, creating a chaotic window of escape. Goldfinch and Best, using scavenged wood from bed slats and floorboards, Red Cross sheets soaked in porridge for canvas, and instruments cobbled from old gramophone parts, began designing the glider atop the castle's highest chapel attic. Fearing constant guard patrols, the team operated under extraordinary secrecy. More than 24 fellow prisoners formed of construction crew, dragging materials piece by piece during nighttime distractions. Plans, smuggled in as schoolwork, were adapted from pre-war British glider manuals. Progress was monitored daily, with every possible structural challenge, weight, lift, control surfaces, solved at midnight meetings by candlelight, hushed lest any echo betray them to the German guards below. The massive technical challenge fused the camp's finest minds. Dutch mathematicians calculated flight trajectories, French pilots advised on lift and landing, American engineers supplied adhesives and fastenings hijacked from Red Cross parcels. By November, the skeleton of the Colditz glider sat fully assembled in the hidden attic, awaiting only final flight testing and, hopefully, the necessary chaos to allow its launch. The Paradox of Hope, War News, Daring, and Despair, December 1944, early 1945. By December 1944, as the Battle of the Bulge dramatized the shifting front lines, news within Colditz oscillated between wild hope and gut-punch despair. Allied advances now seemed tangible. Russian armies crashed westward through Poland, while U.S. and British forces pressed from the west. Radios, now built from scavenged wires and batteries, snuck in with sympathetic Red Cross workers, crackled with cryptic bulletins. Each fresh rumor, German supply shortages, prisoner exchanges, rumors of an imminent Allied breakout, percolated through the camp, fanning new escape fever. But the flip side of hope was a rising psychological toll. Guards, jittery and overworked, sometimes lashed out with arbitrary punishment, and paranoia infected officers in charge. Several escaped leaders, worn down by 2 or 3 years behind walls, fell into depression or escapers' fatigue, doubting whether all this ingenuity was now futile. The Colditz glider project, too, straddled hope and anxiety. What if the war ended before a launch? What if final German defeat meant only more chaos and risk? Still, the escape committee pressed on, refining last-minute plans for potential mass escapes, ready at a moment's notice. Polish veterans assembled the final tunnel, while French and American teams doubled their efforts perfecting disguise protocols. By New Year's Eve 1944, the sense of history hung heavy over Colditz. Would the castle give up its captives through daring, or must they await liberation from outside? The final push, countdown to escape in the endgame, February-March 1945. As winter melted into spring, Germany itself began to fracture under the weight of total war. Air raids thundered overhead, Nazi power waned in the east and west. Inside Colditz, leadership, now a fluid, ad hoc alliance, prepared for the war's final chapter. In February 1945, the United Escape Committee instigated synchronized rehearsals for a castle-wide breakout, mass tunneling in the French quarters, simultaneous disguise drills among the British, and rapid evacuation routes charted by American logistics teams. Final signals were agreed upon: a coded whistle, a burst of pipe-tap Morse, a dropped chess piece, each ready to mobilize scores of men in seconds should German authority collapse. On March 8, 1945, the escapers prepared the Colditz glider for its first test. With the castle population now nearing 500 officers, the plan was to ferry out key leaders and await further opportunity to free larger groups. That night, Allied POWs crowded the chapel attic, eyes glued to the moonlit skeleton of their hope. Every detail choreographed, hands at the ready, ropes tied, a desperate trust in engineering and luck. Even the guards seemed to sense change, as orders from Berlin grew frantic and contradictory. Yet, as dawn broke, Allied artillery thundered ever closer. Perhaps the promised liberation would precede any flight. Still, the escape committee stored the final plans, tools, and faith. For in Colditz, the ancient stone had finally yielded, not just to engineering, but to indomitable human determination. The tension before dawn, Allied thunder on the horizon, March-April 1945. As March 1945 waned, Colditz Castle pulsed with electric anxiety. Reports crackled in from clandestine radios and sympathetic civilian workers. Soviet forces had swept into Silesia. Americans thundered across the Rhine. For captives within Colditz, every sunrise could mean freedom or sudden violence. The castle's guards, many young, scared, or shaken by nightly air raids, fumbled for orders that grew more erratic. Rumors spread: would the local Wehrmacht resist the Allies, or would the SS stage a last, bloody stand? The United Escape Committee, operating almost like a military staff headquarters, convened night after night. Was this the moment to launch the Colditz glider, risking all in a flight over walls, out into enemy-held territory possibly bristling with panicked Nazi soldiers or roving bands of desperate fighters? Or would mass overland escapes, using disguise and hidden tunnels, give more officers a chance to slip away amid the unfolding chaos? To add to the tension, news reached the prisoners that Heinrich Himmler had issued orders. POWs were to be held as hostages, bargaining chips for the fading Reich. Colonel Todt, Colditz's last commandant, grew more desperate, shuffling nervously during inspections and muttering about orders from Berlin. Heartbeats raced, sleep grew scarce, every escaped leader revised contingency plans as thunder rumbled ever louder from the west and east. Colditz had become a powder keg, a final such drama in a war of countless prison walls. The fate of hundreds hung in suspense. The liberation begins, Allies at the gates, April 15 to 16, 1945. April 15, 1945. From the castle's lofty turrets, POWs watched artillery flashes in the distance, echoing across Saxony. Scouts with binoculars, formerly prisoners of ruthless discipline, now saw American tank columns winding along roads, their silhouettes flickering in the dawn haze. For days, the population of Colditz had lived on a razor's edge. More guards fled than stood fast, and command visibly crumbled. Suddenly, at noon on April 16, as an anxious hush held in the main yard, a convoy of US M8 armored cars appeared beneath the bluff. American Major General Matthew B. Ridgway's advance party had arrived. An incredulous French officer recounted, "From ancient stones and barbed wire, we gazed out, to see the stars and stripes." For a moment, time stopped. Were we dreaming? German officers, terrified of reprisals and desperate to avoid being mistaken for SS men, presented the camp's keys to U.S. forces, offering surrender and honorable treatment, ironically, the very code Colditz prisoners had used in their own escape games. Within hours, American and British flags flew atop the ramparts. Sentries handed over their rifles, and in the Grand Hall, Allied prisoners gathered, singing "God Save the King," La Marseillaise, and the Star-Spangled Banner, tears streaming down faces drawn by years of captivity. Across Europe, camps were liberated, Buchenwald, Dachau, and lesser-known stalags. But Colditz, storied as the escape-proof castle, was not stormed in battle, it was freed by the inexorable sweep of Allied victory. Yet, amidst the jubilation, questions and secrets lingered. What of the still-hidden glider? Who would stay to guard German prisoners now taken in reverse? The fate of the Colditz glider, too late to fly, but never forgotten, April 17 to 18, 1945. As liberation settled over Colditz, rumors of a hidden aircraft swept through the Allied ranks. American officers, now acting as liaisons in the post-capture chaos, marveled as British Flight Lieutenant Bill Goldfinch and Engineer Jack Best led a select group to the old, dust-choked chapel attic. There, veiled beneath false walls and ropes, lay the fabled Colditz cock, the near-complete glider, its pale canvas gleaming in the morning light. Best explained the scheme, showing how they'd planned to launch the glider from atop the ancient roof at dawn, using improvised rails and human power. The flight would carry two men several hundred meters over the Mulde River into the forest beyond. Allied journalists and technicians measured the construction, marveling at the courage and craftsmanship. "Here," said Best, "is proof that freedom cannot be caged." The glider never took flight. Too many unknowns, shifting front lines, sudden liberation, and the risk that an untested craft could dash hope at the moment of victory. Yet, documentation preserved, drawings, parts, and stories, spread quickly, faded in British and American papers within weeks. Decades later, engineers would reconstruct the Colditz cock, successfully flying replicas on television as testimony to Allied ingenuity. For Goldfinch, Best, and their multinational team, the glider remained a symbol, not of escape thwarted, but of spirit unbroken, even when facing insurmountable odds. Aftermath, Freedom, Reckoning, and the Colditz Legacy, May-June 1945. In the tumultuous weeks after liberation, the Colditz story rippled across continents. Officers sent telegrams and letters home, some to families that had lost hope, others to governments compiling names for post-war honors. American and British commanders organized emergency medical care for the most malnourished. French and Polish officers set about searching lists for comrades lost in other camps or battlefields. German guards and commandants, now POWs in reverse, nervously faced investigation for wartime conduct. For many Allied officers, a strange camaraderie lingered, a recognition that, even within a dungeon, moments of shared humanity had flared amidst struggle. Escaped leaders became celebrities in post-war Europe. Harry Neve would go on to serve in Parliament and aid British war crimes prosecution. Pat Reed published best-selling memoirs. Michael Sinclair, The Red Fox, returned quietly to a changed England. American aviators, Polish engineers, Dutch mathematicians, all scattered across the world, their accounts fueling television and film. And the glider itself? Preserved by Allied engineers, it entered legend, the machine that almost flew, the last, greatest symbol of ingenuity amid despair. For surviving Colditz veterans, freedom came not merely as the opening of a gate, but as a validation of every defiant act, every clever ruse, every test of unity. They had beaten history's most arrogant prison with laughter, engineering, and relentless hope. Epilogue: The enduring spirit of Colditz, post-war years and remembrance. In the decades that followed, Colditz became hallowed ground, its echoing hallways and underground tunnels visited by historians, veterans, and students of human courage. The castle's stones, once gaunt witnesses to desperate ingenuity, now host museums that document the myriad escape schemes, alliances, and dramas. Survivors from Oflag IV-C returned for reunions, their laughter mixing with tears, as they retraced the steps and tunnels, viewing commemorations of dummies, fake German uniforms, forged documents, and the silent, still wings of the Colditz glider. Schoolchildren wrote essays, tourists marveled at the walls that did not, in the end, hold back hope. In Royal Air Force clubs and Allied embassies, stories of Colditz lived on. No fortress is ever truly escape-proof, wrote Pat Reed, and for generations of soldiers, civilians, and resistance fighters, Colditz symbolized the victory not merely of armies but of men who dared to dream freedom in the most unlikely places. When the Colditz cock was finally flown, decades later in television experiments, its modest flight bore witness to the ingenuity born in shadows. The lessons of Colditz reached far beyond military history. Wherever oppression looms, the spirit of persistence and unity can turn even a prison into a beacon. Thus ended the legend of the Colditz escapes, not just a tale of walls and barbed wire, but a living history of resilience, inventiveness, and the unyielding power of hope.